Do 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 do. Oh, hey, what's going on? Good morning, good morning. Really good to see you. Thanks for giving me a few minutes to share. I'm about 2 weeks in on this latest build, and there's a couple of really interesting moments, and I don't know, some nice width, definitely some rough edges. So let's take a quick look. Basically, what you see here, and I've apologized if I had to blur a few things out. I won't have to do that beyond this screen, but instant. I'm working. I'll show you right now. I'm adding a little anchor here in the pre-rendering sense, so that you won't have that delay there. But the content itself is instantly delivered, and then we're halfway there. Right? So we've begun the journey of pre-rendering BlazorWasm, and it's delightful. It's so cool. All right, so let's tuck that away. We can quit with the silly blurring. Everything here is pretty boringly named. Thanks to a different project. If you haven't seen it, I have a deep rename project out there somewhere. I use it all the time, and it allows you and me and anybody to rename not just a couple of files and not a couple of patterns, but it'll scrub the entire repository and rename files and folders and namespaces. Oh my, good stuff. But there you go. All right, so when we come out and look, a pattern hopefully you've gotten familiar with, even if you're still making fun of me and making jokes, I'm happy with it. I do it too. But triple underscore, double underscore, single underscore, and some pluses, I'll explain briefly just because it's nice and goofy. The shared kernel is the very, very center of our onion, the very bottom of our stack, however you like to look at that. But as we move down this tree, forced by these goofy abuses of the English language structure, you are, we're walking the onion tree, we're walking the orthogonal stack is all in here. Everything you could want, you can deploy it as a monolithic, what's it, the golden monolithic microservice architecture, or you can start to divide those out and deploy them as microservices, maybe sharing a common data source, or as microservices truly, and having each their own data source, and a little concern for one another. That's those. In this case, you have good enough architecture that those are deployment decisions. You don't even have to worry about. But all right, so all of our business logic lives here, core primarily, and then infrastructure. We start to think about persistence, databases, and disks and files. Oh my! Right? And then API. We start to think about how would someone interface and interact with these things. We have some common library pulled out of the API because we want to share it with Blazor, and Blazor doesn't appreciate some of the MVC bindings that I'm using. We have identity and pub sub. These double pluses are just sort of easy to rip out, can be in its own repo, can be deployed. You probably won't ever touch it once you get it happy, or minimally. SignalR server and identity for social authenticators as well as localized authentication, username, email, password kind of stuff. Cool. And all of these products lean on the identity server and the SignalR server to as part of their concert when they want to do certain things. All right, and so we'll look at all this. Then we have our Blazor client, we have an admin client, we have a Blazor server, and I was playing around, but in the end, I'll delete this. I tried hard to justify using anything other than Blazor. I want to make sure I wasn't just being silly. But once I turned on and kind of set up the pre-rendering side of BlazorWasm, I got everything I could ever hope for. Um, so good. All right. What does this thing do? So when we drop all the way down to the core aggregate roots here, really your services, microservice architecture, they're hanging out together. They can be split out. They can be in their own repos. A lot of times I just end up deploying these things to like a local NuGet repository or a private NuGet repository or a public NuGet repository, and then concerting them back together that way. Here you'll see, again, a number. I like to teach from these things. So we've got Docker, we've got NuGet deploy, we got local deploy, we got single artifact deploy, we got options. Digging in here to the account, right? We have a nice, reasonable, healthy domain sitting underneath this idea of a referral count. Our aggregate root, and the one entry point to this entire world, is you're going to be dealing with an account, and everything is beneath that account. It has, in this case, referrals, referred, it's got campaigns that you might be running. At the end of the day, this is going to help us generate sign up forms and just simple kind of one-page landing structures that are so useful to agencies. And it's a different need than, maybe SurveyMonkey or something like that. All right, so you've kind of got the story in mind. Our sources are sourced, so when you fill out the form, maybe you're doing a referral activity, and so there's kind of a issuer and issuant. And then the campaign describes what were the agreements and terms, and what some things of that nature, like maybe I'm sorry, this campaign's expired, or I'm sorry, this campaign can only be used by 100, people, and they've already all been claimed, or I'm sorry, you've already, done something under this campaign. You got to wait for the next one. A lot of different rules you can kind of anchor into that idea of the campaign. Oof, look at all those code comments. Let's clean it up while we're here. Leave it better. Thinking out loud. This pattern got ripped and refactored. We'll see them tests here in a minute, and we'll take it. All right. Cool. And then once it's all set up, we have this idea of our sources and our source, then we have a referral. This also allows us to anchor on the email address alone, and so if we get variations on name, phone number, other data, no big deal. We'll store those as aliases and keep cruising, and we'll always keep that keyed on the email across the system. That's kind of it, right? Pretty basic, straightforward. What do we want to look at here? So we have a referral account, we got our aliases, we have this idea of the campaign. Yeah, it's pretty boring, right? These are just business, POCO, boring objects. Okay, these are not POCOs, right? This is the opposite. I'm sorry, that would be an active record model reference. And this is probably good arguments to have, even with myself. These are not plain old class objects, right? These are business domain objects, and they're really smart. And all of what matters to us the most is chilling up here. Everything beyond here is just like plumbing, and it's lovely and lightweight and should really skip to the do to this tune. Cool. All right, so you can imagine anything interesting here you haven't seen before. Well, we describe what you might consider part of your entity framework queries, or maybe you're up in your API controller and you're writing some of those link statements, the get from the repository, select, where, include, blah, 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 blah. Again, just describe these down here and makes it lovely, easy to test, clean. The code becomes pretty. We'll see that here in a minute. And by describing these specifications down here, I get referral account by ID with referrals, right? So this one's thick and heavy and includes a lot of related tables where maybe we just need to skip by. I don't know which one's going to do this. It's been a while since I stared at this project, but you get to shape the model of the data and its relationship to everything. But consider we're just chilling in memory. We're just in a DLL or in our core library. And so this will be linked to list or linked in memory, whatever, versus what you were probably doing as link to data. But you can clearly see this is going to run just fine up there against data as it does down here against in memory. Yeah, beautiful. So we also have our local domain events model. And so we'll probably not see a lot of that today. I want to get to the test, but this idea that we're able to raise domain level events inside of our domain object here and capture those events and respond to those events. So when we are up in our infrastructure, perhaps like saving data somewhere, if that successfully happens or before we save the data, we can tap into this events pipeline and decide what we want to do with it. We could separate it out. I was thinking the other day, I'll probably have pre-save events and post-save events. Before you go save this domain record, try to do these other things, and if those go well, then go ahead and finish that save process. And once that goes well, go do some other things. Right? Nice little internal event. And you'll see a lot of use a mediator. Mediator gives us sort of this temporary, ephemeral memory-based messaging queue, right? It's like this temporary container service with guaranteed message delivery built into it. That's an interesting way to think about it. It's nowhere near that cool. But anyway, so by raising domain events, well, I guess we don't use mediator in this one. In this one, we're going to end up just literally adding that domain event to a collection that all these objects share because of the kernel. But throughout the rest, we use mediator to handle that kind of thing. So if we look at these base entities, they have a list of base domain events, and this base domain event array can then be interrogated up here in our infrastructure. I'll try not to run off on a bunch of these tangents. Do, 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 do. Here we are. So entities that happen to have events, this would be a post-save event, and then we can go ahead and apply all those behaviors. Good stuff. All right. So I think we're about to leave core here. We had looked at our domain events, named exceptions, right? So go ahead and have a nice clean set of named exceptions, and they're also boring and so easy and cheap, right? They're just wrapping system exception, but it allows us to use clean language in our tests and use clean language in our code. It helps tell the story. Love code that tells the story. Yeah, pretty boring. So we're going to leave core and everything that matters is here. This is our business logic. We can put a different infrastructure on it, right? Everything after this can change without a lot of impact and drama to what mattered to us the most and what we'd written the most tests around and what, et cetera. All right, so we move to infrastructure where we do grab any framework. We probably grab maybe some sort of a file writer and reader. We're going to handle all of our, what do you want to do when we turn off all the power? What's written to disk and persistent um, in that larger sense. And so ND framework gets introduced here, very boring. What of all the stuff we're talking about, what ultimately will persist and does ND framework know about? Not every object, it's not an active record model. These don't map perfectly to what we ultimately described as being our object sets here. Don't have to anyway. They will definitely not over time. Excuse me. All right. We also see, a little obnoxious, I guess, in my opinion, but also lovely, right? Having a moment to just, it's like your router these days being in such plain English. It's a little obnoxious, but like kind of lovely because this tells the truth and keeping these things very healthy and each related type of problem being solved very close to one another, the way they're all organized here. Patterns then are going to remain very consistent, and it's good, good on the brain, no context switching as I move throughout the stack, so to speak. But anyway, we're just describing for any framework's sake, in this case, what do those relationships really look like, and we didn't pollute again our business object with those concerns because these are things we could plug in and change. We're not likely to. It's over touted. I think a lot of applications end up a little obnoxious because they're like, everything could change. But then, you watch them for 15 years and, one thing ever changed. So don't go too wild there. But it's possible. It wouldn't cost us nearly as much to make that change because we've done a decent job. All right. So we're now kind of at a point, we're still just chilling with libraries. These just output DLL files. API comments outputs DLL files. We finally get down here to API. And API comment, I don't want to skip past it too fast, but it's, when you're touching into the API, what are some of those shareable concerns like view models and request response objects and records, and kind of a newer concept there, and shareable interfaces, etc. Didn't have to break this out until I was forced to because of some challenges in the API and the way like wiring up these endpoints. And so some of the some of the way these bindings are being applied, and I want to look at it further. I think there may be a new answer in .NET 6, but some of the way these bindings were applied is in conflict with the Blazor stack, and it gets real upset. And so our API endpoints, we have standard controllers, and we have sort of the RESTful endpoint pattern, both implemented. Might pick one, might support both. It's fun. This endpoint patterns is newer to me. I think I'm kind of moving to it. In this case, I just built them out pretty straightforward. We're injecting mediator and mapper, auto mapper, so we can see, stop it. We can see these auto maps where I've just described the relationship between the domain transfer object, DTOs, or whatever you want to think about your bottom layer as, and the view models and that we might want to present. Well, in this case, we definitely want to present. There's not anything here that isn't used to the front ends, and so there's a clean way to clear up some of those mappings. For instance, as your backend sometimes gets more elaborate, there may be a lot of subsystems taking place that you don't want or don't need to expose on the wire, and so you just clean them out in the view model, and then they go away. And then this mapper, as you've described those relationships, did not open that one. Back to the controller. So the mapper, after we've described those relationships, which is not being used in that file, can just take the result coming back from your mediator's execution of your referral add account command and its handler. Result comes back as that business object graph and is mapped against that view model, which was described in the automap file. Yeah. But these all end up very beautiful. I hope this right here says something to you. Your API endpoints, your controller pattern is just connecting a left and a right, and maybe handling some exceptions and maybe providing some sort of an injected service or maybe an HTTP client factory. I don't know, it's just very few things that are maybe needful in that moment to allow the business answer on one side and the request for an answer on the other side to kind of connect and make sure the security stuff's dealt with. But it's a routing pattern. It's not meant to have any sort of thick business logic. So here we just say, yo, mediator, have we registered a referral account add command and a handler for that command? If so, go ahead and holler back. And so if we look at where we have done that, we come back to our infrastructure layer and we see this is part of a CQRS, command query response segregation, separation pattern, something. Should be called separation now. I say so. And as we roll in here then, CQRS style, we're just describing really little more than in-memory object wrappers for our query and our response, and then invoking the specification patterns and whatnot from our core. So looking at, we're looking for like an add command. This is the biggest request. We're trying to add a referral account. This is the biggest request, trying to add a referral. And pretty terrible, straightforward mapping of the things on screen to the in-memory needful so that we could issue the request. Now this add command, just the object, don't even, we could get rid of all this and make these public and do that because this really shouldn't be anywhere near this smart, and this file will get much cleaner. And we come over here to the handlers and we're going to see that referral add command handler, and we're telling mediator, hey, go ahead and register this cat, and we're going to return a referral account. And here's our handler. So finally we get down here and do a whole lot of thinking about life. Now each of these should be, oh that's right, so we start at the top here and we use this referral account spec to load that account and all of its current everything. Then we walk through it to make sure that the account and the campaign and the source and the sourced, and the refer and the referred, are all knowable and known and valid and happy. And if we walk that whole tree and life is good, and or we create it and it is still good, then we finally get to add that referral and save those changes. Right? If not, we do other. So there you go. So we finally had an API endpoint. We can use Swagger and we could, touch that endpoint. But we're way the heck out here, and I'd be remiss if I didn't apologize. All of us probably wanted to see way back up here while we were building this thing, right? What do you do? Do you build a console app and start just hammering to the console like, oh yeah, like when I add this, it does that, and oh yeah, great, right? Like, sure, at some point in our career we've done this, but there's so many things wrong with this. We lose so much of the delicious conversation we're having, even unto ourselves, in these moments, and we're just needing to shift that to a slightly different point in the stack. We need to just come down here and start with these lowest level unit tests and say, okay, I want to have a referral, and here's my constructor. And so now I've got this pattern going on here with this bulk static data. I'm positive I'm going to find a better one, but I keep creating these static objects. So if we come out here, we'll see this static test data and giant stiff. And in fact, it's gotten to the point that I break them into partial classes to protect some of the innocents. And there you go. So we have these static blocks of known and knowable test data. So when we're down here asking ourselves about I don't know, what do you want to try first? Okay, I want to create a new one and make sure it gets its name, right? So, okay, create a new referral account, pass in that known name, and assert that it is still equal to that known name, right? And you can use your logger and different things to go ahead and get this into your console and get this into your system out. Now it's safe. Like you can make this run again and again and again forevermore as part of your everything. Like unit tests run so fast, and this is just delicious. We can debug this one test. We can execute, like, in a sense, just this single method, air quotes, which really allows you and I to narrow what we were attempting to manipulate in the system to make sure it was, happy or protected itself against unhappy. So we got constructors and create, news and all the different ways that happens, and creating referrals and all the different ways that happens. And if I keep using the same email address but messing up the name or messing up the phone number, and on the same on the other side, and invalid campaigns, oh my, right? If we really take a look, something simple quickly blows out to a considerable number of tests. And if you want to have a system that's going to let you submit your information or create a referral, then you're going to need to, you're going to want 40 really good referrals. And 15 of them are normal and great, and the rest are all these weird situations that you want to test for and make sure behave as expected. And you can think about and describe and build all that out in tests. You can build it out in, simple mocks and diagrams as part of your definition of ready, as part of your conversation and tending to the growth and development of your product backlogs, or however you work through, the work, so to speak. But over time, cataloging and as you step through the system, every step of the way, creating those console tests. And we can come out here to our unit tests, and we could see that we were told no. And, I could say .NET watch test. And while I'm out here working on these, just like anything else, it'll sit there and continue to rerun. So we got 10 passed in 32 milliseconds, plus all that stand-up time. So there you go. Having a nice pattern for your unit tests, a little project sitting out beside your project where you can easily dip over and just jot down your notes in the forms of tests. And this is the point in your stack to honor TDD, right? That you would go ahead of yourself to craft and think about how I'm going to test and the test data and the testing and the questions I'm going to ask. And you kind of ask those one or two at a time as you begin to approach um, standing up your plumbing and exercising it, and then quickly stepping into like true business domain logic and exercising it and testing for it. Write a failed test, write some code, kind of write them side by side, get the test to pass without cheating and lying, but probably minimally, right? Don't just say return true, but you know, if I was writing a game that I did this over the weekend, but you know, maybe part of building it up, you say, count how many stars are in this big string of data, and that's the number of active cells. That's 7, right? And so, is that fast? No, that's probably going to end up a terrible answer if the system needs are as such that, you know, more than one person on one machine is going to run it. But make it work. Honestly, that I could leave that code forever and it would work. I may find it to be ill-performant one day, and so I'm going to probably refactor it, right? But for now, I'm going to leave it alone. I got the test, made it pass. Run another test, made it pass. Run another test, made it pass. Had a collection of these, saw the whole thing work. Shoved in some test data, saw the whole thing work. Was happy enough, kept moving. Had I at some point, at any point, I decide to go back and refactor, I've got all those darn tests, and they're going to tell me immediately if my refactoring injected some new funky behavior or if I'm good. I did a good refactoring, and none of the tests, i.e., none of the system noticed. Shouldn't have noticed. Maybe the performance changed, right? Those kinds of things it should notice, but overall the inputs and outputs staying the same is the win. All right, so the next thing we laid down was infrastructure. So did that work? Well, we're using a pretty simple repository to wrap ND framework, and largely we're using that repository, let's look at it, because we can turn around and teach ND framework by way of teaching our repository to only accept our aggregate root. Ta-da! Now we have forced you and I throughout the rest of our code not to violate our domain aggregate root. You won't be able to create a repository for table XYZ, right? You'll have to come in through the aggregate root as we intended. So good. And hats off to this cat. I like learning lots from him. If you've not met our Dallas, he's got a lot of repos out there that you'll find lots of things to learn from. Good stuff. All right, so we want to know that that works. Bugger was doing something and lost. Oops. Let's go here. Essentially, we're just exercising the repository, and it's very boring and very simple. And if you are able to control both sides of the code, especially if you can have something delicious like .NetCore on both sides of the code, then the actual plumbing necessary to stand these up is very, very minimal. There is no app-DB context provided. That's going to come from the API, right? It's going to come from the next layer. So we just pretend to be that next layer. We provided app-DB context, switching it out for an in-memory database. You could do whatever you want here. And ta-da, we now have an opportunity to simply pretend that that whole endpoint is up. Now, what that is going to prove for us is that we're able to talk to the infrastructure, and it compose itself and the tables have been created, right? All the good stuff has happened, using migrations, or in this case, it's kind of just using built-in. It's going to take that latest migration and apply it all at once. You can't apply migrations inline in the in-memory one, I don't believe. But anyway, so you've now got like your true database hydrated, and you're asking it, add these and do these and save these, and it's coming back healthy, happy, and whole. That means we've done a good job here and describing those relationships and all the things that we ultimately needed and wanted to exercise. So these are even more boring, right? So these integration tests, at this point, you're just getting to treat that repository as a first-class citizen, and you can kind of go to town from there. Cool. And it's all in memory. So you can initiate it with the seed data that you want and go to town exercising it. You can wait and just use statements to hydrate it with data. I like using seed data files and known sample data sets and creating stuff, a little concert of both. Nice way to go. Then we got out to our API endpoint and we looked at that controller endpoint, and for sure you want to be able to hit those controller endpoints. Let's go back to the right project. So for sure you want to be able to hit those API controller endpoints, and again, if you can control both sides of the conversation, it's so good these days. It becomes very, very easy. Let's see what happened. I am going to have to stay in that other project for a minute. It becomes very easy to stimulate those API endpoints. So we've injected our HTTP client factory. It's given us an HTTP client. We're hitting our game's endpoint. It's a terrible example because it's all written out like that. Getting our result and then simply executing an assertion. This gets much cuter. I believe it was in this layer of the stack I started bringing in, there we go, like a fluent interface. So fluent assertions, if you're not using them, really delicious. And I'm going to reapply everything here and get it all caught up and cleaned up. But in this case, here's a mix, bad mix. Let's convert this. So we would say result game ID should be ID. And you can look up those assertions, but that's the fluent interface assertion. So you're ultimately saying assert, just like we replaced there. All right, and we still have that big static stack of seed data laying around, and we did seed the data, so we can ask questions in some sort of an assumption that has taken place, as well as adding new stuff and testing, invalid endpoints and throwing the correct exceptions and all of these good things. All right, so again, standing this up is pretty simple, much like the last code, except an appdb context does exist. So in this case, we're going to reach up into the API project that we're essentially bootstrapping and launching and remove its appdb context opinion from its iService collection, replace it with our own opinion, and away we go. Right? So another really, really beautiful, lightweight way to get involved and begin testing your API endpoints when you're able. If you can't control the code on both sides, it's not hard. You build a small wrapper here that is going to, you'll probably end up needing to recreate or bring in their library. So you have the objects and their object graphs and all those things. And ta-da, you can create a tiny little wrapper and do the same thing. But if you can just execute your own code, how lovely. All right, so now everything we want to stand up and try and ask ourselves, did this work? And do I get a list of games? And are there many games? And et cetera, so on and so forth, become very, very simple. Yes, wrong project, so I'm not going to run that one for you. When we finally get down here, I will run these for you, to these UI tests, and we see Gherkin feature files, right? So given these basic tests, if I navigate to this particular account and campaign. Did the logo change appropriately, right? Just a really simple, goofy, quick way to get through asking, did this stuff behave the way I wanted at the time? I was working on routing and error handling and these kinds of things. A little later, I got it built up enough. Can I fill in the form? I don't want to type this in over and over and over again, but if I come here and I use this account, and I use this campaign, and I provide these inline data values, can I see a thank you message? And is the top portion filled in and the bottom portion filled out? Right? Pretty straightforward nomenclature here. I like this language, and then I like as a developer how I can turn right around and bind to that language, so it's not terribly brittle. We have to be pretty consistent and get into a little groove together, but not a big deal. And so now these bindings turn those into data points that I can ultimately pass into something and have it work. I like the API controller and such. I don't want logic here, right? I might want some assertions here, right? This is a good place to do. We see that fluent interface again, your assertions logic, but not the business smarts, right? We're going to move over, and certainly not the HTML page bindings, if nothing else. So we're going to move over here to our page object model, and we see we're using playwright, and we've just wrapped what it would take to grab these different field values or navigate to this thing or update this thing or click this button, right? And we don't have to look at any of this, right? We write it and we write tests for it, but we get to then use it. Okay, got to actually open these. We get to then just kind of use it to write this really clean, asynchronously go fill out this form, and when you're all done, come back and go do this, and when you're all done, come back and great, and then finally get to a place where we're asserting, right? Then the logo name should be this, and it should end with this, and match that, and all these other good things, right? So if we come over here, make sure this thing is up and running. Let's actually test. Well, let's leave it alone for a minute. And I believe I've got the browser set to display, so we would visually be able to see this test run. Away we go. I'm about halfway through, I think I started by talking about this, moving things into a pre-render BlazorWasm posture. And so the final thing for me to move over, you see the whole thing kind of fires up pretty instantly. The final thing is that lazy pull of the logo and background images. And there you go. It's even filling out the form for us. Oh, that feels so good. How many days and months and years of your life have been spent filling in your own screens and trying to simulate a situation and so here you go. And as you can imagine, if you needed just tons of those, you can easily tie in some sort of a name generator or different things like this to give yourself good looking fake data and these sorts of things. So those tests passed and life is good. And if we went and looked at the data, have those right to SQLite at the moment, we should see all sorts of wonderful referral sources and their aliases. Looks like we didn't do any weird scenarios there. And some campaigns. Yeah, so super cool watching the whole thing come together. I hope there's something in there for you. It's been a good couple of weeks. Going to continue rolling it out, working on a bit of a server admin side and how to kind of create and stand these things up and manage them. There's some emails being sent in the background right now. We talked about those events earlier, so if we wanted to look at a new referral created event handler, we're going to see this email sender and some emails being sent and things of this nature. Super cool. We'll end with a stand down of these. And there were a couple of ways to look at and think about deployments. Certainly, cloud native is an option, and if you go AWS, there's really no work to be done except YAML files. You can deploy these APIs as endpoints, Lambda Sleepy serverless functions pretty simply on the AWS stack. On the Windows side, you have to do a little bit of hacking around to get into Azure, but not a big deal. It's just some patterns to honor. And yeah, pretty delicious like that. In this case, what you might want to do in some senses, is that a word, would be to do like a Docker compose. Make sure it's nice and clean and Docker's running and life is good. Docker is not running. But I have described, go away, the whole world here. Build up a base image, pull from that base image and add a few more bits for SAS, NPM utility that I'm using in Blazor mostly, but also some NPM, other reasons to have some NPM pieces. Our test containers, okay, working on that right now. The API endpoint, Blazor client, the admin client, and an Nginx server. Now that I'm moving to pre-rendering, the WASM clients, instead of deploying to Nginx, they're going to, they each now have a server component. So it'll be a reverse proxy in here, just like if we actually look at his guts. It'd be a proxy in here, just like we're doing with the API, instead of flat static content delivery, right? No big deal. So we'll change that and clean that up. But now that Docker is up, or not, all right. So there you go. Quick review while it thinks about life. Local base just pulls the SDK, copies the boring files. Certainly a lot of places these things could go differently or be improved upon. But local shared takes from that shared base, adds node base, and installs that SAS library. Moving into each project that has Docker concerns, like the API, taking a base, doing our build off our shared base, projects and the restores, taking the published bits and copying those out on top of our base and deploying those .NET library, so Kestrel, thus the reverse proxy from Nginx to Kestrel. Look at maybe the Blazor client here. Again, our final published base, and then we take from our Blazor build image, grab the client, restore the client, change the app settings. I didn't find a mechanism built in for this, so yeet the prod app setting file and put it in play, which is actually fine by me, and then take those final published bits and copy those out. That'll stay the same. The server will come to take and host those static files and then reverse proxy to the server. Yeah, I think, and the rest of these are boring. This is an old .NET 3 image, so it doesn't use any of that shared stuff. It's very standalone. What else is going on that's cool? Yeah, I guess the final bit that's cool is if we go back to Docker Compose, and you look at some of these tags, anything that ends in build, we turn right around and tag that as publish, push it to Docker, and those images are then available. So my deployment scenario right now in this posture, pretty hilarious. What am I thinking about? There it is. So this is what is running in production. Is it just takes the prod images from Docker container registry and runs them. It takes about 0 seconds. I guess you might do a Docker Compose poll to get them at first, or to update them. That takes a few moments, seconds usually. And then running these is instantaneous. Right? So delicious. Hope there was something in there for everybody. Hope you're having an amazing day. I'm going to be over here doing some pre-rendering Blazor and getting that finished up so that I can inject a service server side that taps straight into the data and inject a service client side that then respects those API endpoints. Until next time, have a beautiful day. Dinner, cheers. Later.